Hey everyone, I'm Sloan and today we're talking everything IKEA greenhouse cabinets. We're going to talk through what they are, why they're helpful for your houseplants, how to set up grow lights, and all the specifics of my personal setup, as well as what plants do and don't do well in an IKEA greenhouse in my experience. So you've maybe heard of IKEA greenhouses before. If you're really into houseplants, it's probably nothing new, but maybe you're just getting into houseplants, so let's dig into it. IKEA greenhouses are essentially just IKEA cabinets that people have retrofitted into greenhouses for their houseplants. I would say the most common IKEA greenhouse cabinet is the Millsbow, but there are also other cabinets that people use often, like the Fabrikör and the Rudsta. I happen to have a Fabrikör Tall, which I really like because it's skinny and not super tall, and so it doesn't take up a ton of space in my house. The Millsbow is much bigger, so you can fit more houseplants in it, but it's definitely going to take up more real estate in your home. So you can kind of just choose whatever style works best for you. IKEA greenhouses are really awesome because they're a controlled setting for houseplants, so you can adjust the humidity levels, the lighting, and the airflow for your specific houseplants and create an optimal setting for them. Like anytime a plant isn't doing well, you can just shove it in there and it's an optimal location for that plant to rehab and hopefully do better for you. All right, so let's get into my specific setup and how to set up grow lights, which I think is the most complicated part of any setup, but I'm here to make it easy. So I think you need 7 things in order to have a good IKEA greenhouse setup, which include the cabinet itself, grow lights, some way to attach the grow lights to the cabinet, which we'll get into, a fan, shelving, a humidity reader, and a smart power strip. So let's talk about the cabinet. The most obvious place to get an IKEA greenhouse is obviously IKEA, but I didn't live in a city with an IKEA when I got mine, and so I had to get a bit more creative. Initially, I looked into the closest IKEAs to me, which I was living in Des Moines, Iowa at the time. So the closest ones were Minneapolis, Kansas City, and St. Louis. And I had set up a notification to email me whenever they had the IKEA Fabrikör in stock. But before anything came in stock, I actually found one for sale on Facebook Marketplace and was able to drive just 45 minutes instead of a few hours to pick mine up, which was definitely much better. Facebook Marketplace is where I would recommend looking for an IKEA greenhouse if you have a way to transport it, because a lot of people purchased IKEA greenhouse cabinets a few years ago when the houseplant craze was extra crazy and no longer want them. So sometimes I see IKEA greenhouse setups on Facebook that include absolutely everything you would need, and you don't have to buy all the individual pieces yourself. You can just kind of take what someone else did and put it in your home for a really great price. So I would definitely keep an eye out there if you don't have a cabinet yet. You could theoretically use any cabinet. It doesn't have to be IKEA, but the IKEA ones are in particular really great because they're made out of metal and glass, which aren't going to get moldy or rot or do anything that wood might do in a humid condition. So I definitely think if you're looking into creating your own greenhouse cabinet, even if you don't go the IKEA route, I would really recommend not getting a wood cabinet, as the humid conditions just really aren't going to be good for the wood materials that the cabinet's made out of. I use Barina grow lights in my IKEA greenhouse setup, and I chose those just because they're priced well on Amazon. Some grow lights can be pretty expensive, and I feel like Barinas are fairly reasonable. They also give off a pretty warm light. I really want to avoid anything that gave off like a doctor's office feeling, and I also don't love purple grow lights, and the Barinas are very warm. And the Barina grow lights are also really strong, and so you're never gonna have the issue where your lights aren't strong enough. You kind of have to be careful not to burn your plants with them and be careful about how close your plants get to the light, but it's better, in my opinion, to just be careful what plants you put close to the lights than to have lights in your cabinet where the plants on the bottom aren't getting adequate light. Then you need something to attach the grow lights to your cabinet. And Barina grow lights also come with some materials to attach the lights to pretty much anything. They come with these sticky pads that you can use to stick to something, and they also come with screws, which both of those are useful, but personally, I didn't want to drill holes into my cabinet, so that kind of, couldn't use the screws. And then the sticky pads, I just don't think are secure enough. Theoretically, if they stayed sticking there, like it wouldn't really matter, it'd be totally fine. However, in the case where they fall off, first off, it's gonna damage your plants that are under there, and also I'm just a little worried that it could catch fire. So I was looking for something that would be as secure as possible. Barrina grow lights come with brackets, and the brackets are kind of intended to be used if you were going to screw your grow lights into something like wood. But I found magnetic hooks on Amazon that fit the brackets perfectly. So this is how you attach the brackets and screws and everything to the grow lights. You're gonna take a little itty bitty screw that is different than what came with the Barrina grow lights. They're 0.7 by 5 millimeters, and you're going to put that through the little bracket hole, and then that piece right there comes from these hooks that I got on Amazon. You will unscrew the hook part and just take the little magnet part on the bottom and screw that right onto the screw, and it should fit perfectly. And then just do that to the other side, and it just makes it super easy. Everything fits great, and it should fit on your cabinet. You don't have to worry about it falling off, and that's it. It was honestly so easy, and the magnets are really strong, so I'm not at all worried about the grow lights falling down. And also, it's really easy for me to move them around if I ever wanted to. I don't really feel like I need to, but it's nice to know that it's not something more permanent like a screw or something that could leave a sticky residue. I can just pop the grow lights right off of the cabinet anytime I want to. Next, you're gonna need some shelves. Technically, IKEA greenhouses come with glass shelves, but I would really recommend getting shelves with holes in them. One of the most important things to have in a greenhouse cabinet is air circulation to prevent mold and fungus from growing. And if you have the glass shelves, it's really gonna prevent a lot of that air being circulated throughout the cabinet. And so I would recommend looking for any sort of shelf with holes in it. The particular ones that I have are from Etsy, and there are a lot of different shelving types that you can get on Etsy. Mine are triangular, which I like because it allows me to have taller plants with moss poles, but you can get large square ones, and then that would allow you to have more plants in your cabinet. They would just have to be shorter and smaller. The holes in shelving also help with light filtration, where if you were to get shelves that were opaque, it's gonna be really hard for light to filter down all the way to the bottom of your cabinet. Next, I would really recommend getting a fan for your cabinet. Again, this is gonna be really, really helpful for airflow and trying to keep rot and fungus from growing. But if you absolutely don't wanna get a fan, I would recommend opening your cabinet at least once a day just to let it air out. And again, trying to keep any nasty things from growing. Next, I would really recommend getting a smart power strip. That makes having grow lights so much easier. I will of course link everything that I'm talking about down below to make things easy for you guys. So I'll link the exact power strip I have, but anyone would work. I like the one that I have because you can adjust each outlet to different times. So my grow lights are set to run for 12 hours a day, but I have my fan set to run for 14. So it goes for 1 hour before and 1 hour after the grow lights are running, which I do just because I'm really trying to make sure nothing gross is growing in there. So I want to have a fan running as much as possible, but I'm not gonna run it for 24 hours a day. 14 seems a bit more reasonable. Finally, I would really recommend having a humidity reader. A humidity reader is going to tell you what the humidity inside your cabinet is, which is gonna allow you to make adjustments if needed. So if you have really low humidity, you can add things in order to increase the humidity. And if your humidity is really, really high, it could mean that you might want to add a second fan or open up the door and just let it air out. Like if we're talking personally, I like my humidity to stay below 90%. Sitting around 80 is about what I'm looking for. So if it's 90% humidity or higher, I might open up the door and just let it air out because that's quite humid in there, but you might have a different threshold that you like for your houseplants. There are a few things that a lot of people do for their IKEA greenhouses that I don't. I've never found them necessary, but I'll share them in case you find it helpful. And I'll explain why I don't like these. And the first thing is having a humidifier or a Pebble tray or a cup of water in your IKEA greenhouse cabinet. And essentially all three of those are going to increase humidity. The humidifier is obviously just spitting water, misty water into the air, which is going to increase humidity. And then the Pebble tray, which would just be taking a plant saucer, filling it with pebbles, and then filling that with water. The water will evaporate throughout the day and increase humidity that way. And the same thing with just keeping a cup of water in your greenhouse cabinet. Personally, I don't do any of those three things because I've never really needed to. As long as my plants are well watered, my humidity stays around 80%. You'll notice today it's a bit lower, but that's because I've been opening and closing the door in preparation for this video and just making sure my cabinet looks really good. But generally it's sitting around 80% and I'm totally happy with that, and I don't feel like I need to do anything extra on top of it to increase the humidity. A lot of people also weatherproof their cabinets, which could mean caulking around the edges at the bottom and adding weatherproofing strips to the door. Again, I've just never really found that to be necessary. My greenhouse cabinet stays plenty humid. I know the weather stripping is extremely common with the Millsbo Tall, so it could be that different IKEA greenhouse cabinets hold in humidity better than others. I've only ever had this one, so I'm not really sure, but it's something that if you're wanting to get into building an IKEA greenhouse cabinet, I would maybe try it out for a little bit first, see what your humidity looks like before investing a bunch of time and money into weatherproofing it. A lot of people also drill holes for the cords that you need to run through your greenhouse cabinet, and that could be a reason why you might need to weatherproof it if there's literal holes in your cabinet, but I didn't do that. I just lifted up the bottom of the greenhouse and kind of fed the cords through the side. It's a very tight squeeze, and I'm going to avoid lifting up the bottom ever again because I'm afraid that it's gonna rip the cords. It's a really tight squeeze, but it did work. So if you don't want to drill holes in the bottom of your cabinet, it will work if you want it to. Next, let's touch on what plants do and don't do well in an IKEA greenhouse. And this was something that when I first got my greenhouse cabinet, I looked everywhere for information about this online, and I just never found anyone answering it in such a clear and concise way. So that's what I'm here to do. And we'll start out with talking about the top shelf. The top shelf of my greenhouse cabinet is the closest, or really of anybody's greenhouse cabinet, is the closest to the lights. But in my case, I just find that Barina grow lights are really, really strong. And so I'm only putting plants on the top shelf that I know can take quite a bit of high light. And my favorite type of plant to put on that top shelf are Hoyas. They love all of the light that's up there. And I have also had really, really fantastic luck with my Hoyas flowering in an IKEA greenhouse cabinet as well. I've actually never had a Hoya start to flower outside of my greenhouse cabinet. It's only happened with the ones that have been kept in here. I've had a Hoya macrophylla albo flower, a Hoya hushkleana variegata, as well as my Hoya compacta, which is actually working on another bloom in my cabinet as we speak. So if you struggle to get your Hoya to bloom, you could try putting it on the top shelf of your IKEA greenhouse cabinet. And other plants that I like to put on the top shelf are lipstick plants, though I've never been able to get a lipstick plant to bloom, unfortunately, as well as string of hearts. I have had multiple string of hearts blooms in my IKEA greenhouse cabinet, so I think they really like those conditions as well. As far as the rest of the shelving, I found that most Amydrium, Philodendron, Monstera, Anthurium, Scindapsus, and Epipremnum do really well, especially any plant that's on a moss pole. The humid conditions of the greenhouse really allow the moss pole to stay humid for quite some time, which I found that my plants really, really like. And I would also really recommend getting a closed back moss pole that's made of plastic, where the back part is just basically straight plastic all the way up, because those also really help the moss pole stay humid longer, which plants really like. I also find that my IKEA greenhouse cabinet is a great place to put plants that are in terracotta pots. I find that terracotta pots tend to dry out really quickly just in normal room humidity, but in my IKEA greenhouse cabinet, it really isn't as much of an issue. So if you really like the look of terracotta but struggle with how quickly it dries out, definitely try putting some in your cabinet. Also, a couple of new plants that I've only had in my cabinet for about a month are an orchid and a banana tree, and so far so good. They seem to be really enjoying it, but I guess only time will tell if they continue to do well. I will also say that my cabinet is a little bit sparse right now. I could fit a lot more plants in here, but I just moved 1,000 miles from Iowa to Texas, and I have a bunch of prop boxes full of cuttings of plants that I need to pot up. And so eventually I'll pot those up and put a lot of those plants in my greenhouse cabinet, since those plants are really used to humid prop box conditions. It's gonna be a really great way to transition them into being soil plants and growing in the real world. Before I just throw them in room humidity, I'm gonna put them in my greenhouse cabinet soon, and it will look a lot more full. So as far as plants to avoid, I would say the number one type of plant to avoid putting in a greenhouse cabinet are any plants that don't like high humidity. So the top two that I would think of are cacti and succulents. You could maybe try a Thanksgiving or Christmas cactus in an IKEA greenhouse. Technically, those are jungle cacti, which have slightly different needs than a desert cactus, but I've never personally tried it, so I can't vouch for how well they would do. but that's one that you could maybe try and I wouldn't be too worried about it. Personally, I found that my Pilea peperomioides hated my IKEA greenhouse cabinet. I don't know why. I really thought that it would like the higher humidity, but it did not like it. So I would avoid putting a Pilea peperomioides in an IKEA greenhouse cabinet. It might be all Pilea, but maybe not. However, obviously everyone's plant is gonna be a little bit different, so you could try it, but personally that plant just really didn't like it for me. I've also never had good luck with prayer plants in my IKEA greenhouse cabinet, which is really strange because prayer plants love high humidity, and so you would think it would be a good place for them, but they've just never liked it. I don't know if it's too much light, I'm not really sure, but the other thing about prayer plants is that they tend to be spider mite magnets, and whatever plants you put in your IKEA greenhouse cabinet, I would not put any plants that are pest magnets because it's just a closed terrarium for those pests to just infest every single plant in there. And so be really careful what plants you're putting in your cabinet if you don't want to have an entire cabinet of plants to treat. I would also say plants to avoid putting in a greenhouse cabinet are just any plants that are really large or grow really quickly, more just because it's kind of annoying. If you have a really big plant in there, you just can't have as many plants in it. And if it grows really quickly, then it's annoying because soon it's outgrown the greenhouse cabinet and you have to find a new place for it. But that's really just personal preference. I would really say the most important thing would be to try different plants out and see what does well for you and what doesn't. I think that's one of the most fun things about houseplant collecting is being able to experiment and seeing what works and what doesn't. So that's my #1 recommendation. Finally, I just want to share a couple tips on a couple of things to think about if you are considering getting a greenhouse cabinet. And the first one is that your plants love the humid conditions, but so do fungus gnats. And they will just grow and grow and grow and grow and lay eggs, and it's just not pretty. So be careful of that. I would say that my greenhouse cabinet is the #1 place where if I'm going to have fungus gnats, they're probably going to be living. But I haven't had them because I use something called a systemic that is a powder that you sprinkle onto the soil of your plants, and it soaks into the soil. Your plant will drink it up as well, and the systemic will kill any larvae in the soil and anything like that. It's just a great way to kill pretty much everything. But some people don't like using a systemic in their home, and so other more natural things you could try are mosquito bite dunks. Those never really worked well for me, or spraying your soil with neem oil. That can work well for me, but you have to really keep up with it. This is another area where you're gonna wanna experiment and see what works for you, but personally, I find that systemic is just a really easy way to keep fungus gnats out of your soil. Cabinets can also get really dirty, which I feel like owning houseplants can just make your house a little bit more dirty. Like there's literal dirt. You have dirt in your house, of course it's gonna be more dirty, but I think the extra humid conditions of a greenhouse cabinet just kind of make it a little bit more gross than maybe if you just had plants on a shelf in your living room. The extra humid conditions mean that your plant's pots aren't going to dry out as quickly, which means that your plant's gonna hold on to water longer, which can cause the plant to try to express some water via guttation, which is when your leaves are crying, is kind of how I would put it, where you have little droplets of water coming off on the leaves. And so that can make it kind of messy. And also, if your plants are really happy and they're flowering, especially Hoya blooms, just make a huge mess when they die and fall everywhere and there's sap everywhere. And I think because also the IKEA greenhouse cabinet is made of glass and metal, both kind of shiny materials, it's just really obvious when they look dirty. So keep that in mind if you're someone that doesn't like to clean. I just feel like I have to clean my IKEA greenhouse cabinet a lot, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but it is kind of annoying. All right, that is all from me on IKEA greenhouses. If you have an IKEA greenhouse cabinet, make sure to comment any tips down below that I might have missed. And if you watch this video and still have questions on an IKEA greenhouse setup, I'd love to be a resource for you. Please comment your questions down below, and I'll try to keep an eye on my YouTube Studio app to see the comments. Even if you're watching this years later, I'm gonna do my best to respond to them and help you guys out, because I just remembered feeling a little bit overwhelmed when I initially wanted to create my greenhouse, and I want to make all of you feel a little bit less overwhelmed and make the process super easy for you. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!